everyone. I'm Surya Gulagani, Director of Marketing. We'll just give a couple of more minutes, just looking at a couple of audience joining in before we start.
Hey, Surya, you want to go ahead and get started?
Yes, Dave. So, hello everyone again. I'm Surya Gulagani, Director of Marketing here at Datagaps. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we get started, we have a couple of quick housekeeping comments. First, we have muted all mics so that there are no unintended distractions. Next, the chat room is open so you can interact with us through the chat. And finally, at the end of the session, we will open it up for Q&A. Thanks again for joining us today. In our last webinar, we introduced our DataOps suite, its functionality, and how we can automate end-to-end data migration testing. Today, in this webinar, we will be discussing one of the modules inside DataOps suite, that is ETL Validator. ETL Validator is a most comprehensive end-to-end data and ETL testing tool, which will help in automating ETL testing. So let me make a few introductions. Today on the panel, we have David Small, VP Sales and Marketing here at Datagaps, and Shubhanshu Dikshit, our Product Manager at Datagaps. So this is how our agenda for the day is like. Can we have the agenda slide? Yeah. So we'll have a quick overview of the DataOps suite and its modules, a DataOps suite ETL Validator overview. Then we will dive into the DataOps ETL Validator module use case demonstration and a quick demo of how the module works and how it can help you with. And then we will have a Q&A session where you can use the chat box to push in your questions. Dave, all yours.
All right. Thanks, Surya. And welcome, everyone. Glad to see a bunch of new faces, but also some customers that are on the call today. So what we encourage you to do is, if you have some questions, post those in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the day. So a little bit of a commercial about Datagaps and what we're about and what we do. So we focus every day on the end-to-end validation of the data journey through your enterprise. So from the point of ingestion to the point of moving through ETL processes and ultimately through consumption in your data analytics platform, we check to make sure the quality is proper, the ETL transformations are done, and the reporting and such are functioning correctly. So that's what we focus on every day. Now, we're going to be talking about ETL Validator today. And just to sort of set the stage, especially for some of our customers, we have an ETL Validator product that was a client-server architecture. And that product is still in play. We still enhance it and a number of things. And a lot of people have gotten a lot of great value out of the ETL Validator, the client-server version. But we've also realized that there's another way that we could be doing this, and that was through a web-based version. So what we've done is we've taken the functionality of our client-server ETL Validator, and we've incorporated that into our web-based DataOps suite, and ETL Validator is a function within that suite now. Now, for our customers, we've provided them with a free migration path to the new DataOps suite ETL Validator. So don't worry, we're not abandoning you, and you can still continue to use ETL Validator, the client-server version. But if you want to upgrade to the other one, that's at no cost. So hopefully that explains that. So DataOps Suite contains a number of technologies, and we also have a companion technology called BI Validator. With DataOps Suite, we have what used to be the client-server ETL Validator. We have that embedded in the DataOps Suite now. So all the capability you used to have, plus a lot more, are embedded in the ETL Validator in the web version now. We also provide data quality monitoring and test data management. And we have also opened this up to become an ETL framework. So if you choose to use us for ETL framework, you can do that as well. So the two things we'll be talking about today are data flow, which is the ETL process, the ETL capability that we provide, or the framework, and then ETL Validator, which is that technology that does data quality testing. It does ETL validation and so on. So those are the two things we'll be talking about in the DataOps suite today. As I'd mentioned, as data comes into your enterprise, whether that's from your CRM systems, it could be flat files, it could be streaming data, ETL validation takes care of data quality checks and a number of things at that point in time. So you identify those data assets, they are consumed by ETL Validator, and we can apply data quality checks. And as it comes into the enterprise in the landing zone, at that point, we can also validate that your ETL processes are running as expected by mimicking those same ETL processes in ETL Validator, and then do it in comparison and give you the results of the two things. So, you know, the expected results, if you will. And then ultimately, a lot of people use us for BI testing as well. But in today's webinar, what we'll be talking about is the left side of this. A lot of times in data quality monitoring, there's a couple of things that we do there. First of all, as data comes in, we begin to learn about that data, and we understand the upper and lower bounds of that data. And as data continues to come in, we will alert you to the fact that there might be some anomalies based upon what we've learned. We identify that as bad data and let you understand, or let you go back and validate whether that data has been formed properly or not. The good data can be moved on and ingested. So that's one of the things we do along with data quality rules. So we not only apply AI to the data coming into the environment, but we also apply data quality rules, you know, the simple of which might be null checks or other types of date checks and so on. So we provide you with that capability as data is being ingested to make sure it's being done properly. With the ETL validation and people migrating to the cloud, what we found and what a lot of our customers and prospects are asking us about is, how do I validate the initial movement from my legacy data warehouse into my modern data warehouse? So if there's hundreds or if not thousands of tables that are being moved, you know, how do I validate that those tables have been moved properly? And so we have a migration wizard that allows you to do that test and that validation very quickly. You also typically will want to keep the legacy system running for a period of time while the new modern data warehouse is being consumed and tested and so on. And that means that the ETL processes that fed the old, the legacy system, and the ETL processes that feed now the new modern architecture, they need to be validated to make sure that they're running properly and doing the same kind of transformations and so on. So we see people using the ETL Validator a lot in data migration for those two use cases. And then they use BI Validator a lot for comparing the reports between the old and the new. Another example of a use case in ETL Validator is a lot of people have moved their production applications from their on-prem arena to the cloud. And then what they want to do is they want to reconcile or ensure that that data has been moved properly and that they haven't missed important items such as invoices or supply information and so on. So they use us, the ETL Validator, for that reconciliation, not in a data warehouse type arena, but in a migration of your production applications to the cloud and making sure that data has been moved properly as well. The overall architecture of the ETL Validator and the DataOps suite, one of the big changes in the ETL Validator is now you can not only just use the database engine as doing the technology that does the heavy lifting, you can also use Apache Spark. And we have customers that are comparing millions, if not billions of rows of information using Apache Spark. So the one big addition into the web-based version of ETL Validator is that Apache Spark implementation. So you interact with the architecture through a web browser, could be through third-party software or through a CLI tool. All of the orchestration, the development of the test cases and all those things, they are done in the server. And then the heavy lifting is done in the engine, either through Apache Spark or the database engine. We store information in the server based upon Postgres or Oracle. Postgres comes with the technology, and a lot of things need to be stored, like schemas, like the test cases, maybe snapshots of data, a number of things. Those all get stored in the repository, and that's where a lot of the work is done as well. So with this, I'd like to turn this over to Shivanshu to talk about the challenges and the ETL testing concepts.
Yeah, hi guys, hope you guys are doing well. So in ETL testing, ETL basically stands for extract, transform, and load, and ELT also follows the same pointers, except you use the loading aspect first before transforming these data sets. We face a number of challenges. The main aspects here that we are going to cover are the huge volumes of data sets, the aspect that the data sets themselves are heterogeneous, here implying that there's a lot of variability in the data set, even when you know what to expect. An example here could be an address could be as small as a few characters, and it could be as long as something that could exceed the limit of your particular server. So it could be something along those lines. And the transformations that we normally do are in most cases complex, hence we want to get some good insights from them. Therefore, the validation of these complex transformations are in turn even more complicated, and thus results in very complex systems which can break easily through any upgrade or update that we do. So therefore, we also have problems because of the transformation. And finally, it's extremely test data dependent. And what we mean by this is that if you want to test your ETL properly, you need to have the correct type of test data in your system and also the correct amount of test data. So these are the challenges that we're going to tackle. And along with this, we have a bunch of ETL testing concepts that we are going to go through throughout our demo. Now, I'll just list them out once again. These are metadata testing, data completeness testing, data quality testing, ETL regression, reference data, ETL incremental testing, and finally, ETL performance. In our demo, we are going to go through these particular aspects, and we'll show how exactly our product is used to tackle these problems and implement these concepts. So can I share my screen now? Yeah, thank you. Right. Hopefully you guys can see the screen right now. Right. So what you see in front of you, I mean, the customers here already know what this is, but for the newcomers, this is our DataOps suite. This is the web version, and this is what you're going to see as soon as you get into our application. Now, what you see on your left are the home tab, the various tabs, and what you see is the main screen with our usual summaries of the runs, what are the common tasks, and what are the recent activities that we have done. What we're going to discuss very first is what a source and a catalog is, given that these are the few aspects that we get as part of the ETL validation tool set that we provide. So a source here, as you can see, is a connection that we provide to any particular data source. Now, our product has a wide array of systems that we can connect to, as you can see here, including generic APIs as well as each and every common JDBC that one can think of. These data sources can be used to define connections using simple credentials like any other system that you speak of. And this is where we define our sources before ingesting them into our subsequent flows. So these are what we call sources. Moving on to what a catalog is. A catalog system is present right here, as you can see in 3 dots. Now, the catalog that we're going to look at is one specific catalog that we have altered just to showcase what all things we capture. In the deck, the very first point that we were talking about was metadata validation. And this is in turn a way to showcase that. What you see in front of you is a particular DBO schema in a MySQL and MS SQL server. And here you can check out that every change is being tracked properly, exactly what the change type was and what the change details are. You can use the system to filter this particular aspects and go through the range and particular type of change. And if there was a particular schema, you want to see some particular changes at. I do not need to specify or showcase how important metadata changes are. And if anyone has worked there, they would know that a change in the data type results in subsequent functions in the transformations breaking and other aspects happening. So this is very important for us to note that metadata validation is an integral part of ETL testing, and we cover that not just in viewing but also in subsequent flows. Now, this is our sources and catalog, and now we move on to data flows. So we have prepared a bunch of simple examples for us to showcase here. But before we go into the exact flow, what I want to spend some time on is showcase exactly how the components work here. So what are the components that we work on? So if you worked on any ETL system, you would know that there are a source, there are some transformation units, and there are targets, things, and other aspects we can use. So we have something similar here. We have JDBC connection, simple file connection, and a generic connection itself. A JDBC connection simply asks us to choose one of the sources that we had defined earlier, and then give it a particular name, and then correspondingly ask a query around it. That's what a JDBC usage is. Then we have our processor. This is the bulk of where our transformations take place. We can do anything from a simple SQL to Python code and DB scripts as well. This is where your ETL capabilities could be run. Now, I'll skip data quality for now, and sync is just the target where you're going to push all the files. This can be a DB sync or a particular file push to an S3. As you can see here, we can just define what exactly is going to be and where exactly we're going to have our target. And finally, the main bread and butter of this particular product, the data quality nodes. I'll be going into more detail on these on exact examples, but just to give you guys a brief, a data compare node basically creates a difference mapping between two data sets. You can have any two data sets selected here, which is within your particular data flow, and you can check whether the records are in A or not in B, or the other way around, if there is any differences, if there are any mismatches, if we should consider null or empty spaces equal, and many other aspects here. We have something similar created already here. And if I can just go through it, yeah, here we go. We can see what are different mismatches and other aspects present. Right now, there are no mismatches, but this is what a data compare node does. Now, a data profiling node is a very good node to help us understand what the data looks like by giving us an aggregation of all the data sets present here. A data profile node will look like this, where you define what exact data set you want to profile. You can choose within the array of aggregations on what exactly you want to see. Note that this will go on every column. And once this particular runs, you see a complete row count, you see null count, distinct count, and every other detail that you might need. This can be particularly helpful when understanding data completeness. So in a case where you want to know that a particular column value cannot exceed a minimum or a maximum value, and you need to check that on the go, you have your option to actually check whether a particular max value and min value is being portrayed properly or not. You can also use this for defining means to check whether your data is as expected or not, and of course using length and min length to cover the examples that we had covered earlier. So this is what a data profile node is. Finally, we'll have a data rule node. This is where we can define a bunch of very important rules here. Let me just quickly pick this up here. We can define our columns, and we can define a wide array of rules. We'll get into this deeper, but I'll just showcase the screen before moving on to the next one, which is we have a SQL query that you can use to identify good or bad records. You can use expressions. Our product also gives in-depth, easy to use zero code features as well, where in cases of duplicacy, domain check, attribute check, you don't need to define any explicit code. You just need to click on them, and they define the column where you want to check the duplicacy, and you're good to go. So these particular aspects have a bit of a zero code mixture in them. So that's what data rule is. Finally, we have we have data analysis. This is where we do in-depth analysis of a complete data set, and we do predictions, basically, where we define what exactly we want to group them, measure them, and then eventually get into predictions. This is not exactly something that we want to cover in this particular run. So with that particular thing out of our way, I want to get started with our actual metadata validation and data completeness node. So Now, metadata validation. As we discussed, if there's a change in the metadata, be it data type change, data length change, or any other aspects, we should see that. Now, we have our catalog to view them on the go. But in case you want a more active approach where you have a file which notes all these data types and you want to check them before every run, what you do is that you define your source, you define your file, and you run them using a JDBC connector. And particularly this data comparison node is going to showcase the statements. It's going to say if there are any duplicates, if there are any mismatched rows, or if there are any aspects which are present only in A and not in B, and every other aspect. In this particular case, we want to showcase that while there are duplicates, they are equal. And so there is no problem. There's no problem in the metadata. So moving on to the next one, which is data completeness. Here we have created a simple JDBC connector. We are pushing that to our data profile node. What we want to check here are the record count. If there are some null counts that we want to push in, we want to check the min and max value of particular columns and so on. As you might imagine, this particular set of tools can be used to a multitude of ways depending on your own systems. So that is what data profile is. Now, moving on to the next one, we want to discuss data quality in depth. Now, when we talk about data quality, it can mean a multitude of things, but I'm going to use the data rule, data quality check, this particular data rule node to define what it means. Firstly, we have something called data reference, where we want to ensure that the values of a column are within a certain rule set itself. The most basic example here is that you have an expected value in the column of gender, and you want to ensure this is within a particular set of values. You might have 5, 6 values between male, female, M, F, and every other thing there. So you want to ensure that it's within them. What you do is you define a domain rule for your particular set. You check whether the gender is in the domain of gender, and this is a zero code system, so that's it. There's nothing more. You can add things if you want to add, but this alone will help you define what a particular domain rule is. Apart from that, your basic checks are null. If you want to define whether your customer key, which is in this particular case a primary key, should not be null. Obviously, that's a very important thing. The other ones are validation rules. Here we are using a bunch of queries to define whether the email address lies within the alphanumerical system itself, and there are no special characters, given that that might break our systems in the subsequent transformations. So we have our validation rule here as well. And finally, we have our duplicacy check. Again, this is a zero code system, so all you need to do is define what column you want to check the duplicacy on and run them. Of course, in this particular case, our tests have passed, but in case they have failed, we can define scores at them, and we can see the particular status here as well. So that is what data quality works in. As you might imagine, if you have an incremental ETL where you don't reload the entire data set, but you get just incremental delta sets coming into your system, duplicacy check and other this sort of checks are really helpful to identify if there's something that's incorrect in your system. So that is what is present in data quality. Now, going on to the final node, this is where we'll be spending a good amount of time. And this is the node, this is the flow which is the most easiest for everyone to understand, which is the data transformation check. Now, before we get into this, I want to specify a few things. Firstly, the two nodes that you see here, source and target. The target node has already been created. The assumption here is that using an ETL process, the source and target have already been created, and this particular flow is created just to replicate the flow and therefore test them properly. So before we get into this further, let me just quickly run by what black box and white box data testing is. White box data testing here implies where you know what the transformation is, which is the demo that you see, where we know exactly what's being transformed. And then we create those rules specifically to test the transformation itself. So here, since we know exactly what's being transformed, here in the case, we are just applying a custom function on one particular column. We have defined it here, and then we're correspondingly checking them in our source versus our target. Black box testing on the other side is where you do not pay much heed to the exact transformation, but instead pay more heed to the exact data sets that you use. You want to you use a variety of data sets to actually break the transformation in most cases. A very simple example would be if you're using date functions in your black box testing, you would use a multitude of dates trying to push back and forth different time zones and trying to see whether your source and target still match. But there you use the data sets. Here, since you know what's going on, you use the transformation. What you see in front of you right now is the white box example. Once again, the main the main party person here is our data compare node. Here we have defined what are the two nodes that have to be compared. We have defined the types of comparisons. And most importantly, we have defined what exact unique key these people are to be compared to. Here, as you can see, it's the customer key. And finally, we have already run this beforehand. We can see the results, and we can see that there are a few mismatches here, particularly in the geography key, where we had applied the functions. Therefore, at least 3 records in the 18,000, which is a pretty decent rate, but at least 3 records have been, incorrectly transformed. And that's what we can catch. This applies immensely in our ETL regression testing as well. And that's where the other aliases of these particular nodes come into picture, which is, say you have a dev web environment and a production environment, and you have deployed a hotfix in your dev. You want to ensure that this hotfix works the same in prod as well. So after a deployment, you apply the transformation in our nodes and then cross-examine. This is the data sets. Here, that is done in a simple click. It's a very quick system, and it can give a proper output as well. And of course, this particular results are also downloadable for you to push forward in your system as well. Similarly, another example could be if you are working before an upgrade or update, or past an upgrade or update, pre and post. If before a particular upgrade, you had taken a snapshot of your data sources, and after that you're taking a snapshot, and you know what a particular upgrade does to particular sources and columns, you can apply those transformations and again perform a check. If the transformations are as expected, you should not see any issues. But again, as we see, in this case, we see an issue. And this is how our particular data transform node works. So this is what the data node system is. I see there are a few questions that have come up. Surya, is there anything that we need to pause for?
No, it's generic recording that was asked.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for that. So that is what we are going to cover in our data flows. Now, what we're going to showcase next is how exactly do you run this. So yeah, you can create a bunch of flows. You can create, a lot of tests, a very lot of complex tests, but how do you run this? That's where we get into pipelines. What you see in front of you is a simple pipeline that we have created. And this particular pipeline covers not just ETL Validator, but our tool as a whole. So we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but what we want to focus on is that this is where you actually define your different flows together. This is where you create, if you have an ETL system, you create the ETL system here as well, and basically sequentialize them, make sure if certain nodes are running in parallel, certain flows are running in sequence, one after the other. And here is where you can also define email notification systems that you can create if a particular pipeline has failed, if a particular pipeline or task has failed, if what is the particular template of this email, and every other aspects can be given here and defined. So if a particular step fails, a pipeline is paused, you can choose that, or you can choose to run the pipeline with notifications being sent. Along with that, one thing I want to specify here is that every aspect of the tool can be called via APIs. So if you have certain scripts or systems that are already in place, you can easily integrate the tool with our systems. And speaking of integration, we already have an integration with Jenkins that we are going to showcase in subsequent webinars. All right. Finally, one aspect that I want to cover before we can pause is that one thing that we covered was ETL performance. Now, I don't want to get into this because that's the next webinar that's what we're going to cover. It's called a test data manager, where we basically use a subset of data sets to create a huge number of records and much more records in the data sets, which is primarily aimed at stress testing your ETLs to see whether those particular ETLs work as intended under certain roles or not. So that is what ETL performance is about. And that basically covers most of what covers in our ETL validation systems. So I'll pause for any more questions, and then we can move on to the final aspect. Right, I don't see any questions. So what I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'll basically go through a quick summary of what we get after a few set of these calls. So a few questions that we usually get is regarding the volume of data sets. Firstly, yes, the volume. We know that since we run this particular engine on particular application on Spark, which can be horizontally scaled, it doesn't matter if you have trillions or billions of records. This particular thing has been proven to work on a multitude of scalable systems. So yes, we can handle a huge volume of data sets. And the next question that we usually get is about parameterization. This is something that we can cover in our demo once again, but we have local and global parameterization in our systems that you can define. And these global variables work to parameterize your system between dev, prod, and even between runs and between containers themselves. So parameterization is properly supported. Finally, one question that we normally get is our system cloud agnostic, as you have seen with our sources and with the targets, that yes, our clients are using this particular product in Azure, in AWS, in MySQL, and every other server that we use. Most of the nodes that we've defined in the sources are being used actively. So those are the few questions that we usually get, and we want to proactively just answer them. And that basically concludes our demo. So back over to you, Surya and David.
Great. Thank you so much, Subhanshu. So team, if there is anyone interested in looking at a trial version or any request demos, or if you want to just go through some documentation of what exactly ETL Validator is about and stuff like that, there are some links that we are trying to post in. And you will also get a slide in the recording. Dave, if you just want to share that slide here, that will be great. And moving forward, we will also be doing some more deep dive webinars into the other modules of DataOps suite, which will cover data quality monitor and test data manager. We will also be having a BI validator related webinar, and how it complements the DataOps suite is what we'll be talking in that particular webinar. Dave, anything that you want to share? Dave, you there? Dave, if you are speaking, you're on mute. Okay, no problem. So that will get us to the end of today's webinar. And if anyone is interested in looking at the platform or just want to get a demo schedule, you can reach us, or please feel free to reach us at contact@datagaps.com. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was on mute. We appreciate everybody's attention. Our primary focus is to help you with your data quality or data testing as it moves through the enterprise. We spend a lot of time and effort. I think we are a very collaborative organization, and our customers, I think, would indicate that as well. We put out a couple of releases, or a release about every couple of months, and we really try to think through and add value every step of the way. As you'd mentioned, we do have a trial period typically for a couple of weeks, where we spend time and effort helping people use their do their test cases and such. And we also provide a POC implementation where it's a little bit more intense, or not intense, but a little bit more elaborate in terms of what we produce. So those are the things that we pride ourselves in terms of the technology and our approach to business. And we appreciate everybody's time today.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you again for everyone to show up here. See you later.
Thanks a lot, folks.
Bye now.